Welcome back to our adventure of nutrition and sport. Chapter 12 is in regards to endurance and ultra endurance athletes. These are the athletes that perform physical activity continuously for up to 4 hours, and that would be our endurance athletes. Ultra endurance are more than 4 hours. Those are our 100-mile folks, our Ironman, the type of activities that are done for an extended period of time. Now, the recommendations in this chapter are going to be recommendations, and there still are going to be adjustments that need to be made based upon the environment, the temperature, the humidity, and so I want to make sure that you keep that in mind as well as you look at this information. The challenge with endurance and ultra endurance athletes is primarily going to be caloric intake. The balance of macronutrients is going to be maintained. They will change a little bit based upon, because this is an endurance athlete, a little bit more carbohydrate as you get closer to the competition. However, we still have all three components, all three macronutrients that we are consuming. This first part is going to be primarily about calories and carbohydrates. The energy system is important to remember, and this goes back to chapter 2, I think, and it's a reminder about how we use energy and what sports tend to fall in that continuum. Now, we never use just solid one energy source. We never use just the Krebs cycle or just, with the exception of ATP-PC, that's when you first initiate. But for the most part, we've got all of our energy systems are cycling, and when you have a higher intensity, or I should say long endurance activity, continuous movement, that we move along that oxygen system and that aerobic system. And so you'll see the marathons, cross country, those are really highly aerobic in nature. And this shows you the primary energy system that's relied upon. It doesn't mean that you're not using any of the other anaerobic systems. It just means that the majority, the prevalence, is going to be aerobic. So our ultra and energy endurance activities are going to be on the aerobic end of the continuum. What the big concern is for these athletes is the high amount of caloric expenditure that is utilized during training and during the competition. And getting sufficient calories is really one of the first steps. Are you getting enough calories to meet the need of the athlete for the training and for the daily needs of that athlete? We calculate or estimate what our daily total energy expenditure is going to be based upon sex, age, and activity. The calculation on table 12.1, and there is an example that's provided, and there's also a calculation I'm asking you to do in the homework, just so you know how to do it, is to look at the resting energy expenditure, which is not the basal metabolic rate. That requires 12 hours of fasting. REE and basal metabolic rate are, one reminder, often used interchangeably, but this is for the REE. The calculation gives you a good starting point. Notice that the body weight needs to be converted to kgs. So it's going to be the body weight in pounds, and there's for every pound, it is no, for every kilogram, it's 2.2 pounds. So if a person weighs 220 pounds, they are 100 kilograms. So you have to convert body weight to kgs, plug it in the right equation, and then you have an activity factor range as your starting point. So the starting point will give you a range of calories that the individual is most likely going to fall within. Now, if you have somebody who's doing extreme training or extreme levels of activity, that activity factor, you'll be closer to the higher end and maybe above that higher end. I always think back at the body size of Michael Phelps, and when he was training for the Olympics, the number of calories that he had to consume was somewhere around 7,000. And that's a lot of food. It's a lot of food, and it's difficult to be, I think people actually get tired of eating. So this is an estimation, and for most of you, that is probably going to be a perfect place to start. If a person is unable to maintain their body weight, then you've got to go above that upper edge. During exercise, it's difficult to match energy expenditure because the person is highly fit. They're exercising at a high energy expenditure. Being able to get enough calories in to meet the energy expenditure is going to be next to impossible, especially for our highly trained athletes. And so the focus should be on meeting the carbohydrate need, and that's going to be for the main fuel, because we're in aerobic, and that's going to be the carbohydrate. Try to meet the tolerable amount of carbohydrate that a person can consume, as well as the fluid requirements. And somewhere between 24 to 48 ounces per hour is the range of toleration. Again, we get that sloshiness, and that becomes uncomfortable, counterproductive, makes the athlete unable to be able to maintain that high level of performance. And sports drinks are going to be the appropriate choice for fluid, because it gives us our electrolytes, it gives us our source of carbohydrates, and it also helps to fuel that or helps with our fluid replacement so we don't become dehydrated. Immediately post-exercise, and we're just talking calories here, the caloric goal is 200 to 300 calorie snack. And so I look at what's 200 to 300 calories. Well, it's great if you can get your athlete to eat something that they can tolerate and keep down. A little bit of protein's great, so milk, some fluid, perhaps maybe half a sandwich. It could be a couple granola bars is 200 with some milk or juice. Carbonated stuff just is not going to be helpful, and we want to practice and make sure that this is something tolerable. The athlete often will not want to eat anything. They'll potentially be nauseated after exercise. So something that is just getting those calories started in that system to start to fuel that glycogen, that refueling process is really helpful. Larger meal, couple hours, 1 to 2 hours post exercise is going to be more likely for an athlete who's just exerted themselves for 4+ hours. The carbohydrate requirements are 6 to 10 grams per kg for endurance athletes that exercise 1 to 3 hours per day. 6 to 10 grams per kg. If somebody is an ultra endurance athlete, we're looking at 8 to 12 grams per kg. but we still maintain 50 to 65% of total daily calories as carbs. So it looks like, wow, 8 to 12 grams per kg body weight, yikes, that's a lot. But when you look at the estimated calorie consumption, you'll find that 50%, when you look at the ultra, get that range of grams of carbohydrate, it's going to fall within that 50 to 60% of total calories. So there are a couple ways of calculating it. So we're maintaining that macronutrient balance. Now table 3.6 has the daily recommendations, 3.5 grams per kg if less than an hour per day, and 5 to 7 grams per kg if you're exercising about 1 hour a day. So this is table 3.6. So you can take a look at that. That's a nice tag spot for carbohydrate requirement. So all this chapter is doing is it's pulling the carbohydrate information, but now looking at, okay, now we've got a person that's going to be exercising at most likely a higher intensity, longer duration, has different needs, has a much greater caloric need, and also some other needs that have changed slightly. But notice that we still are going to maintain our macronutrient balance. Now, one thing that's really helpful before a person does their endeavor, their competition, is making sure that they've got that glycogen on board. And remember, glycogen is stored carbohydrate, and it's found in the muscle and it's found in the liver. Just as coaches will know that as you taper the training 6 to 7 days prior to the event, you gradually increase the caloric percentage of carbohydrates to up to 70% of total calories. Now that's going to be a lot of carbohydrates. What you want to have are, and I'm going to put this next bullet up, fiber and fat should decrease because we're not necessarily altering our protein so much. We should have lower fiber, but if we're training less, our caloric intake is going to be lower. So we have a decrease in our training, a decrease in our caloric need, less fiber because that is going to potentially be some GI problems, and also it's space that's going to make it difficult for a person to feel like they can eat sufficient calories, and smoothies and juices are good choices. So tapering, trying to build that carbohydrate storage by bumping up our percentage. Well, what do we do prior to competition? Well, the goal is to make sure that we're getting enough, and when I'm talking prior to competition, we're talking a day or two or hours. You don't want to have, the athlete needs to have sufficient energy. They need to have a lower fiber content. They need to have enough time to absorb and digest that food, and really it becomes a matter of playing with what works. What works for one athlete could cause GI distress in another. The current recommendations are 10 to 12 grams per kg a day and a half to 2 days before the competition. So we're really putting a lot of opportunity for carbohydrate storage. You are definitely, and if you're a little active, you're not going to be couch slug, but you've tapered, that exercise is going to encourage the glycogen to be stored. You're throwing in a lot of good a goodly amount, but it's not high fiber. Before exercise, 1 to 4 grams per kg, 1 to 4 hours before. But remember, if somebody is in that higher carbohydrate content, you need to have time for ingestion and absorption. Digestion and absorption. As I mentioned, during exercise, when we look at calories, you cannot match caloric expenditure with caloric intake. So our goal is to just get glucose levels maintained by getting that 30 to 60 grams per hour of carbohydrate. The range, individual preference can range, and by using that sport drink consistently, early on, and often. After competition, carbohydrates, generally we want 1 to 1.2 grams per kg per hour every hour for 4 hours post-exercise. Now we do know that a person might not want to eat, so that a small sandwich, 200 to 300 calories, if you can get that 1 to 1.2 grams component in it, that's really great. Now you'll see that there are ideas on tables 3.12 and 12.2 that can help you get some ideas for your table, and I'm going to just identify 12.2. Well, that has like a whole day training meal plan versus carbohydrate loading plan. So it has some examples. I think that table 3.12 is really kind of nice because it gives food examples as well as what the grams of carbohydrate are. And I think that's a nice way to go, so you know that the carbs and the calories are being met.